Hey everybody, Billy Obenauer here, continuing our award-winning series on Knowing Colleagues Fundamentals of Human Resource Management. In this unit, we're going to be talking about Chapter 8, Developing Employees for Future Success. Now, when we talk about employee development, what we're really talking about is a combination of formal education, job experience, relationships, and assessment of personality and abilities to help our employees prepare for their future careers. Okay, we're really focused on changes in jobs and responsibilities here. I mean, in a nutshell, what we're really talking about when we talk about employee development is making sure that we prepare our people so that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be successful in their future positions. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, wow, preparing people to have knowledge, skills, and abilities, that sounds a lot like training. So, what is the difference between training and development? Let's get into that. Well, when we talked about training, we were really talking about making sure our employees were positioned to be successful in their current jobs. Okay, but when we talk about development here, we're looking towards the future. Okay, now because of this, when our employees are engaging in training, their use of work experiences sometimes can be low. All right, we don't necessarily expect them to be building upon their current experiences. Whereas with development, we're kind of integrating what's happened in their past employment and using that to move forward. Okay, similar to our focus, all right, our goal in training is preparation for the current job, whereas our goal in development is preparation for changes in the future. Okay, and then finally, training, because it's tied to your current position, is going to be required. All right, we can't have people in position who aren't trained to do their jobs. All right, whereas development often will be voluntary. Now, we say that it's voluntary in nature, but we need to make sure that we communicate that to our employees. Very often, if you offer a developmental opportunity to an employee, they may feel like they don't have the options to say no. So if you want developmental opportunities to be successful, you need to make sure that employees understand that their participation is voluntary. One of the challenges that employers face is trying to identify who to provide developmental opportunities for. All right, so we have a question here. Should employers provide special developmental opportunities for high potential employees or employees who they view as having potential to be highly successful within the organization? Well, as you think about the benefits of doing this, this might help to motivate some of those employees. All right, it might help to make sure you develop your pipeline so that you're prepared to fill positions when you need to fill them. There are certainly some benefits to providing developmental opportunities for high potential employees. But there are also some risks associated with doing this. Okay, if we don't identify all of our high potential employees, we may have negative motivational impacts on people who weren't presented with developmental opportunities. Okay, another major risk that we have with providing special developmental opportunities to high potential employees is that we may be biased in our evaluations here. Okay, so there may be a discriminatory impact where certain people are provided with opportunities and other people aren't. And that's a very serious risk, not only from a legal standpoint, but just from an ethical standpoint and from a motivational standpoint with our employees. Okay, so we need to think about what steps we can take as managers or HR managers to reduce these risks. Okay, and one of the things that we can really focus on here is making sure that we have clear criteria for who we're going to offer developmental opportunities for. All right. When I was in the field, very often they would say, hey, we have an opportunity for high potential candidates to engage in this developmental opportunity. Give us two or three of your best people who you think can be involved. Okay. And there was a very subjective criteria involved in that. Okay. We need to make sure we're a little more objective in how we evaluate who we present these opportunities to. Now, many of our employees are interested in development because of what we call a protein career. Okay, and this basically means that people are going to change careers based upon their interests, abilities, and values. Okay, so by developing their skills, they become more marketable, so they have an interest in development. Okay, and if you think back to chapter 2 when we talked about the psychological contract, All right, the new psychological contract was all about employability, right? Because employees recognized that they didn't have necessarily job stability, so they wanted to continue to grow in positions so that they would have employability. And often when we discuss this, students will say things like, well, what happens if we invest in our employees and we develop them and then they leave and they choose to go somewhere else? And that's a real legitimate concern, right? Because there is a part of us that doesn't want to invest in someone who's going to move on and go to the competition. But I'm going to pose a different question to you. What if you choose not to develop them and they stay? Okay, then what do you have on your hands, right? So you're not going to benefit from not developing your employees, right? So if you're going to invest in developing them, the other thing that you need to invest in is making sure you're creating a workplace environment where people want to stay. As we move forward here, we're going to talk about 4 different approaches to employee development. We're going to talk about formal education, assessments, job experiences, and interpersonal relationships. The first approach to development that we're going to look at, formal education, looks a lot like what we talked about during our training unit. Okay, so formal education can include workshops, short courses, lectures, simulations, business games, experiential programs, and meetings. All right, and a lot of companies are going to have training and development centers. So large Fortune 500 companies may send you out to their offices, to their corporate headquarters where they'll have training and development centers, or they may have smaller regional centers that you can go to. The training can also occur off-site or through the internet. So if it's off-site, your organization may rent out a conference room in a hotel that you'll use for your developmental trainings, or if it's on the internet, they may offer you the opportunity to register for a course. Maybe you'll take a course through a local college or take something through LinkedIn Learning or something of that nature. These are all examples of how we can use formal education as a part of our developmental programs. Assessment can play an important role in development. You may be wondering why assessment is important to employee development, and I would encourage you to think of it this way. It's really tough to give someone directions on how to get somewhere if you don't know where they're starting from. So by assessing our employees, we're able to kind of figure out where they're starting from so we can put together the best developmental program for them. All right, so as we assess employees, we collect information and provide feedback about their behavior, their communication, and their skills. Okay, and this feedback that we collect, this information that we collect, it can come from employees, it can come from peers, managers, and even customers. Okay, so when we look at the diverse set of people that we're talking about here, that contributes to what we call 360-degree feedback. Okay, so often as we collect data for assessment, we'll use performance appraisals. And these performance appraisals can be most effective for development when they include this 360-degree feedback, which basically means the appraisals have information from people from all different components of someone's work. All right, so we're looking at customers, managers, peers, sometimes suppliers, business partners, a variety of different people, because they're going to help us see a variety of different perspectives. We can also gather data on assessment from psychological profiles and from assessment centers. Now, when we talk about psychological profiling, we really start to think about personality tests and personality frameworks. And the most popular, most widely used personality framework in the industry is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or the MBTI. And basically with the Myers-Briggs, what happens is people are classified based upon 4 different categories. Okay, so they're either classified as introverted or extroverted, as sensing or intuitive, as thinking or feeling, and as perceiving or judging. And then based upon these classifications, they fall into one of 16 different personality categories. Why is it one of 16? Well, it's 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So there are 16 different potential combinations of personalities that we can have here. Now there are some challenges with the Myers-Briggs. All right, so for one, it's binary, meaning there's no scale. All right, what exactly do we mean by that? Well, you're either considered extroverted based upon the Myers-Briggs, or you're considered introverted. There's no one who's kind of in the middle according to this test. All right, there is low test retest reliability, which basically means you could take the MBTI today and get one personality type and take it 6 weeks from now and maybe get a different personality type. Okay, and the Myers-Briggs has not been strongly shown to be related to job outcomes. And we're going to break down some reasons for this on the next slide. So why do we have issues with the Myers-Briggs? And I want you to, we're going to break this down here, and we're going to look at how we classify people as either being introverted or classify them as being extroverted. Now, obviously, there are 4 different categories that we do this for, but we're just going to break it down for one category. Now, as they're classified, they answer a lot of questions. They don't just answer one question, and that one question determines whether they're introverted or extroverted. They answer a variety of questions, okay? And really, they can score in different places because there's kind of like a score range that determines which category they fall into. So let's consider somebody who is really introverted. They might fall all the way over to the left here, okay? And we see their circle over here on the left. And then they take the Myers-Briggs again, and their score is a little bit different, but they're over here. They're not too far off. They show up as being introverted again. If we have somebody over here on the right who's a little more extroverted, they might score over here. Next time they take it, they might score to the right a little bit more, but either way they're still classified as extroverted. Okay, so these people we don't see much change in. We might see a little more reliability here. Okay, but a lot of people score in the middle. Okay, and let's consider somebody who scores over here in the middle, but just to the left of the marker, and they're classified as introverted. Well, the next time they take the test, their score moves, and it moves just as much as the other 2 that we looked at in those previous examples, but it goes over the line, and now they're classified as extroverted. Or maybe we have this person over here who's classified as extroverted, but next time they take the test, they go to the left just a little bit, just enough to be classified as introverted. All right, this is where the reliability issues come from, okay? Because when we use this binary scale, people can kind of jump over the middle there and their classifications will change. All right, now this was kind of laid out a little bit in an HBO documentary called Persona: The Dark Truth Behind Personality Tests. This was a documentary that aired a few years ago, and the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology actually responded to this documentary, and they basically said, we are in agreement here that there are issues with the Myers-Briggs, and academic researchers have recognized concerns with the Myers-Briggs for a long time. Okay, now we still teach it in our classes, and the reason that we teach it in our classes is because when you get into industry, you're going to be using it, or you're going to work for companies that use it. All right, so it's important that you understand the limitations of this test, and that's why I talk about it in my classes. But by no means am I actually advocating for its use in selection processes. Now, the reality of development is that as much as we want to invest in our employees' development, we are limited in the amount of time that we can pull them away from their jobs. Okay, so job experiences are actually one of the most important components to development that there are. And this is really where the majority of development takes place. Because in job experiences, people work on their relationships, they face different types of problems and demands, they complete a variety of different tasks, and they go through many different experiences that we can't really simulate in other developmental tasks. Okay, so we're going to move forward here and we're going to talk a little bit about job assignments play an important role in employee development through these experiences. Now there's 7 different types of job assignments that we're going to walk through here, and we've talked about the first 2 a little bit in earlier units, but we're going to come back to them. All right, the first one is job enlargement, and with job enlargement what we do is we expand the tasks that an employee is involved in their job. We add responsibilities. Okay, so when I was a manager, I often would take different tasks that I knew my employees would have to work through when they got promoted, and I would start to teach them how to do those tasks. Okay, and I'd kind of let them take those tasks over for a time period. That was an example of job enlargement. With job rotation, we move people through a variety of different positions. All right, so when I worked at a Fortune 500 company, we were a large retail company, and we had different departments. Okay, so somebody who was a successful department supervisor in one department would eventually get moved into a different department. Okay, and the idea would be that they would have to learn how to supervise a variety of different departments before they'd be ready to become an assistant store manager. And we had something similar that would happen with assistant store managers. Assistant store managers had 5 to 6 departments that were their responsibility, okay? And basically somebody would move from one cluster to another cluster typically before they would get promoted to a store management position. All right, and the reason behind this was that they had to have exposure to a variety of different positions in order to be prepared to be successful at the next level. Now, one of the challenges with job rotation is we do want to expose our employees to a variety of different experiences, but we don't want to move them too fast. We want to make sure that they're in position long enough that they can learn how to do things, they can learn how to ask the right questions. We need to make sure that we have their buy-in on job rotation, and we also want to make sure that we're not always moving them as soon as they get comfortable, because if they're always being moved as soon as they get comfortable, that can be challenging in terms of getting that buy-in. Okay, related to a job rotation, we'll look at transfers. Sometimes people will move into a different section of the organization, all right? So they may move from one geographic region to another, or from one facility to another as part of their development. Okay, promotions can play an important role in development. Now, ideally, we'd like to develop somebody before they get promoted, but sometimes their development takes place through that actual process. All right, downward moves can be a little bit tricky in terms of development. All right, and the reason for this is that employees aren't always receptive to downward moves. Okay, but there can be a reason why we would use downward moves in a positive way. Okay, and I want you to imagine somebody who is highly technically skilled. Okay, and this person is very technically skilled, and they have been promoted over and over and over again in technical positions. Okay, so in terms of maybe they're an engineer or some type of software developer, and they've kind of moved up the ladder, and they're all the way at the top here. Okay, well, this person wants to become a manager. They're a highly ranked technical associate, but they want to become a manager. All right, but they have absolutely no training in management. Right, so over here we've got the management ladder, and we want to get this person into management. Before they can get to this top level here, they may need to move to a lower level in management. Maybe not the lowest level, but they may need to move somewhere into a lower level of management so they can learn management skills and be successful. Okay, and then finally we have externships and sabbaticals, and these two can be related. An externship is a temporary assignment to another organization, and a sabbatical is paid time off from your current organization that allows you to work on your own development. All right, and we actually see these related in academia quite often. So very often we'll see professors go on sabbaticals, okay, and a sabbatical may be a semester or a year off, where they continue to get paid, but they're not teaching any classes, they don't have any formal responsibilities, and they'll take this time to work on their research, develop their research, and also revamp some of their courses. All right, but sometimes we'll see an externship related to that as well. Somebody might go on sabbatical and take a visiting position at another university. All right, and the advantage to that is that they take one semester and they work at another university, and they may not only develop new relationships that they can use in developing their research and their teaching in the future, but they may see some different ways that things can be done that they then take back to their position at their primary university. And then the final approach that we're going to talk about here deals with interpersonal relationships. Okay, so often the relationships that we develop in the workplace really help us with our development. All right, and one type of relationship that we'll develop is with a mentor. Okay, a mentor is an experienced senior employee who kind of helps develop less experienced people, and we can have formal mentorships and informal mentorships. So I've worked in places where I've had formal mentorship programs. At one job that I had, I had to meet with a mentor once every 2 weeks. Okay, we had a scheduled 45-minute meeting roughly where we would go in, they would ask me some questions, they would give me some advice, and we would move forward. Okay, and it was nice to have the formal mentorship program because it kind of forced me to engage in it. But truthfully, it wasn't the most productive mentorship that I had there. The most productive mentorship that I had in that organization just dealt with the person who I talked to every morning when I went and got my coffee. Okay, there was a different senior employee who I talked to when I was having coffee in the morning. We developed a really strong, tight relationship. And when I had problems or when I had questions, that was actually the person who I went to. I didn't go to my formal mentor. I went to the person who was informally mentoring me. Okay, mentorships are most productive when they're voluntary. Okay, so when employees choose to engage in them, that's when they're most productive. All right, now why do we have formal mentorships if informal mentorships can be more productive? Well, one of the challenges that we have with mentorships is that we want to make sure that they're accessible to everybody. So in our organizations, often we will work to have formal mentorships to ensure that every employee has an opportunity to be mentored. Okay, related to mentorship, we also have coaches. Now, coaching is a little more formal than mentorship because a coach is someone who's going to work to motivate people, to develop skills, to provide reinforcement and feedback, and even help someone find a mentor. Okay, so often you can think of the coach as being the more formal developmental relationship, and the mentor as being the less formal developmental relationship. Okay, but truthfully, we often see these terms, even though it's not correct to do so, we often see them interchanged in industry. So I tend to not try to focus on making sure my students can differentiate between them, because I recognize that when they move beyond the classroom, they may hear them being used interchangeably in industry. So now that we've looked at different approaches to development, we're going to talk a little bit about steps in the career management process. And this slide here provides you with a little bit of an overview here. And on the upcoming slides, we're going to break these down in a little more detail. All right, so the first step in the career management process is to gather data. Okay, we talked before about understanding where we're starting, being critical to developing a plan. Okay, then we're going to focus on getting feedback. All right, setting goals based upon that feedback, then developing our action plans and following up. All right, step one here that we're looking at is data gathering, and for the employee, this is going to involve a lot of self-assessment. And while there are a variety of different psychological tests and tools that you can use in self-assessment, and some of them will be informative, they'll help you understand more about yourself, there's also going to be a lot of reflection that goes on here, because you really need to identify what your interests and your values and your abilities are. Okay? Then once we've gone through the self-assessment, we're going to go into the feedback stage. And here we're going to get feedback from employers. Okay, and they're going to help employees understand their skills and knowledge, how these skills and knowledge fit into the organization's plans. And this really is going to be a lot more helpful if it's separate from the performance appraisal. All right, and the reason for this is that when we do a performance appraisal, we're really in a situation where we have our ratings and our pay are tied to the feedback that we're being given. So as employees, if I'm sitting there and I know my bonus is going to be tied to what my employer is telling me right now, if that feedback's not positive, I'm not really in a collaborative mode, right? I kind of want to argue that because I kind of want that bonus. Okay, if the developmental feedback is coming during that session, it's going to be less well received. If it's coming in a special developmental session, employees tend to be more receptive to feedback in that type of thing. Okay, another key component to feedback is that we want to make sure feedback is confidential. All right, employees should feel confident that they're going to get feedback that is going to remain between them and their supervisor or whoever is providing the feedback. Now, once we've gone through the process of assessment and obtaining feedback, we should be able to better understand where employees are going to fit within the organization potentially. Okay, so the next step here in career development is goal setting. All right, and we're going to think about what types of positions do we want to be in. Okay, what types of skills are we going to have to apply? What type of work setting do I want to work in? Okay, what types of skills am I going to need to make this happen? And then based upon all of this, we're going to set SMART goals. And the acronym SMART means specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and timely. Okay, so when we think about specific, we should be able to understand what those goals are. Okay, when we think about measurable, there has to be a way to measure whether or not we've attained the goal. When we think about attainable, it's got to be something that I can do. Okay, if I set a goal that I want to become Dr. Manhattan, well, that's not actually possible. And if you're not a comic book geek, you might not know who Dr. Manhattan is, and I apologize, but we have to set a goal that's possible. Okay, so I am currently an assistant professor as I'm recording this video. I'd like to become an associate professor. Okay, that's possible, so that's attainable. Okay, it needs to be reasonable and relevant. Okay, so it's got to be tied to what we're doing, and it's got to be timely. Okay, when I say that I want to become an associate professor, it's not someday. Okay, it's within 4 years. That's an example of a timely goal. All right, now we take this, and particularly we're going to look at the skill acquisition of what we've done in goal setting, and we're going to tie this to our action plan and our follow-up. Okay, so we're going to prepare an action plan to help us achieve these goals. So we're going to figure out how are we going to acquire the skills that we need in order to achieve the goal. Okay, we may look at a variety of different developmental methods. There's not just going to be one way that we try to work through this plan. Okay, and then the outcomes that we work on here become our career development plan. And while employees are working through their career development plans, executives should be working through succession planning. And with succession planning, what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify who's going to fill the openings within our organization when these openings occur. All right, so we're thinking about who's going to be the next CFO, who's going to be the next VP of Finance, who's going to be the next VP of Operations, okay? And then since some of these positions are going to backfill from lower levels, we're thinking about, okay, who's going to fill in the mid-level manager positions that become open as mid-level managers move up within the organization. And that's what succession planning is all about. Now, as we work through succession planning, we have to start by identifying positions to plan for. All right, so what positions do we think are going to be open in the near future? Then from there, we're going to start identifying what employees to include in the succession plan. We're going to look at the job requirements for positions that are going to be open. We're going to consider employee potential. Okay, we're going to measure employee potential. So somebody may not be ready for a position today, but do they have the ability to be prepared for that position? All right, then we're going to move on to review and plan to meet the developmental needs. So if somebody has potential but they're not quite there, what type of development do we need to engage in to get them to the place that we need them to be? Okay, we're going to link the succession planning with our other HR systems. All right, so maybe we'll link it with pay, maybe we'll link it with training, right? So if we need to develop somebody, the things that we need them to do should be in their training plan. All right, perhaps they're going to get a bonus, or they're going to have some type of compensation related to meeting these objectives. That's what we mean by linking it to the HR system. All right, we're gonna make sure that we provide feedback to the employees, so they need to know if they're on track and if they're meeting the needs of our succession plan. And then ultimately, we're going to measure the plan's effectiveness, because if the plan is not being effective, we need to change the plan or we need to fix the plan. One area where we can see challenges in our succession planning is related to the glass ceiling. And the glass ceiling is a conceptualization of an invisible barrier that keeps members of underrepresented groups from attaining top positions within organizations. And it can be influenced by a lack of training in developmental programs. It can be influenced by biases in selection processes. And really this goes back to Cantor's theory of homosocial reproduction, where Cantor said that as we're building our succession plans, we tend to identify potential successors by their similarities to us, okay, people who we see a little bit of ourselves within, and often these people who we see ourselves within are people who we share demographic traits with. All right, so we have to be very careful to ensure that we don't have biases influencing who we incorporate into our succession plans. And one thing that we can do to help address the glass ceiling as well, another thing that we can do here is to put together developmental systems that are designed to break the glass ceiling. Okay, and basically what we mean by that is we want to have developmental systems that are designed to increase accessibility of opportunities. And a great example of this is the PhD project, which is a program that was designed to increase the accessibility of PhD programs to racial minorities. But all the good that we're trying to do through our developmental programs can be undone if we have dysfunctional managers within our organizations. Okay, and dysfunctional managers are people who can be good at their jobs, but they engage in behaviors that are ineffective and toxic, and truthfully what they do is they just have a negative impact on employees. All right, so examples of some of these behaviors are dysfunctional managers can be insensitive, they might not worry about others, they might not be good team players, they might be arrogant, they might have trouble dealing with conflict management. Okay, they might have challenges with certain business objectives, and they may not really be able to accept change. Okay, and what happens when we have dysfunctional managers is often they will drive good talent out of our organizations, and they'll keep good talent from wanting to advance within the organizations because they make the organization seem like a place that you don't want to be. So this is important to recognize because all of our efforts in development are going to be for nothing if dysfunctional managers are driving good employees out of the organization. If we do have dysfunctional managers, we need to recognize this. We need to try to work with them and develop them so that they can move beyond these dysfunctional behaviors. And if they can't move beyond these dysfunctional behaviors, then we may have some tough decisions that we have to make down the road. That's it for this lesson. Thanks so much for joining me. This is Billy Obenauer saying I hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.